The courtroom was silent until Jasmine Crockett spoke and everything changed. The studio lights burned like tiny suns overhead, flooding the sleek glass desk in a halo of white. Cameras blinked in every direction. Technicians whispered into headsets. The red on-air sign glowed, and suddenly millions of people across the country were watching. It was supposed to be a routine political interview, another heated segment that would fade by morning. But what happened that night would turn into one of the most unforgettable live television moments of the decade. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, a rising star known for her fearless honesty, quick wit, and relentless pursuit of truth. She wasn't just another guest. She was a woman who had built her reputation on facts, logic, and composure, even in the face of chaos. Opposite her sat Bill O'Reilly, the legendary commentator whose reputation was built on fiery debates, sharp interruptions, and the art of keeping his guests off balance. He was the kind of man who could turn a whisper into a war, and he knew it. The topic of the night: justice, accountability, and truth in modern politics. The tension already thick before the first question was even asked. As the host introduced them, both smiled for the cameras, but those who knew could sense it. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. It was going to be a verbal showdown. The first few minutes went as expected, polite, rehearsed, professional. But when Jasmine began to speak passionately about integrity and leadership, the storm began to brew. "Let's not get emotional, Miss Crockett," Bill said, leaning forward, his tone dipped in condescension. A ripple of murmurs moved through the studio audience. Some smirked, others frowned. The tension was no longer invisible, it was alive. Jasmine paused. She took a slow, deliberate breath. Her eyes didn't waver. She knew this tactic all too well. Interrupt, provoke, dominate. It was an old game, one play to rattle the opponent, to make them stumble in frustration. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to stumble. She was there to stand. For a moment, silence filled the room. The lights felt hotter, the air heavier. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says, "I see what you're doing, and it won't work." "Bill," she said, her voice calm but firm, "if speaking truth with passion is what you call emotional, then maybe we need more emotion in our politics." A few audience members clapped before being quickly hushed by the crew. Bill raised an eyebrow, surprised but not ready to give ground. He cut in again, then again. Every time Jasmine began to make a point, he jumped in with a question, a jab, a correction. She barely got through a full sentence before he interrupted. At first, viewers at home saw it as classic O'Reilly, fast, fiery, impossible to pin down. But after the third interruption, the atmosphere began to change. People watching could see Jasmine's patience being tested, yet her restraint only made her stronger. Her composure became its own kind of power. She straightened in her chair, folded her hands, and let him finish his rant. Then, in a tone steady enough to cut glass, she said, "Bill, you've interrupted me 3 times in 1 minute. Are you afraid of what I'm about to say?" The audience gasped. Even the crew members looked at one another. For the first time that night, O'Reilly leaned back slightly in his chair. There was a shift in energy, something subtle but undeniable. The balance of control was slipping, and Jasmine now held it. She continued, her eyes never leaving his. "I came here to discuss truth, not to wrestle for airtime. If truth makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem, that's yours." The audience erupted in applause before producers signaled to quiet down. The camera zoomed in. You could see the slight flush on Bill's face, the tension in his jaw. But Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't mock him. She simply looked back at the camera, addressing the millions watching, and said, Too many times, conversations about justice turn into shouting matches. But justice doesn't need volume. It needs courage. That one line silenced the room. Even Bill O'Reilly didn't have a comeback. The segment continued, but something fundamental had changed. For once, the man known for controlling every discussion was being outmaneuvered not by aggression, but by calm precision. As the commercial break rolled, the camera caught a glimpse of Bill glancing at Jasmine, half irritation, half respect. She sat quietly, reviewing her notes, unfazed. Behind the scenes, producers whispered, "Did you see that? She just flipped the whole tone of the show." They were right. The audience had felt it too. Social media was already lighting up. Clips from the exchange were being posted within minutes, hashtags forming, quotes spreading. Nobody could know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a viral moment that would explode across the internet, sparking conversations about respect, power, and truth on live television. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was the night she didn't just win an argument, she earned the world's attention. As Jasmine began making her first key point about fairness and representation in the justice system, her tone was steady, intelligent, measured. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to make people think. But before she could even complete her first sentence, Bill cut in. "Well, that's not really the issue, Jasmine," he said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. She blinked, smiled politely, and waited. When he finally stopped, she tried again. "Actually, Bill, what I'm saying is that—" He interrupted again. "Let's stick to the facts, okay?" The audience chuckled awkwardly. Jasmine's lips tightened slightly, but she remained composed. She took another breath and continued. "I am sticking to the facts, Bill. The problem is—" And again he cut her off. No. See, that's the emotional argument people always make." By now, a few murmurs began spreading through the audience. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances. Even through the blinding studio lights, you could feel it, the rise in tension, thick and humming like electricity in the air. Bill interrupted again. Then once more. 5 times. 5 times in less than 2 minutes. The host tried to step in, half laughing to ease the atmosphere. All right, let's give everyone a chance to finish." But Jasmine's expression said everything. Her patience had limits, and she just reached them. She turned to Bill slowly, her posture upright, her eyes sharp and unflinching. The polite smile was gone. Now there was steel. "Bill," she said firmly, voice cutting through the noise like glass, "if you invite a guest to speak, maybe let her finish one sentence." The words landed like a strike. The audience reacted instantly. A wave of claps, gasps, and nervous laughter rippled through the studio. The sound engineer's hand hesitated over the mute button. Even the camera operator shifted, realizing this moment wasn't scripted. For the first time all evening, Bill O'Reilly didn't have a quick retort ready. He blinked, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. But Jasmine wasn't done. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. Not anger, not outrage, just truth, heavy and undeniable. "You've interrupted me 5 times in less than 2 minutes," she continued, locking eyes with him. "That doesn't make your argument stronger. It just shows how scared you are of what I'm about to say." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Even the air seemed to pause, waiting for what would happen next. Bill shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. The grin stayed plastered on his face, but his body language betrayed him. Leaning back slightly, hands fidgeting with his papers. The audience could see it. The power dynamic had shifted. Jasmine leaned forward, not aggressively, but with quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need volume to command attention. "I've spent years fighting for people whose voices get talked over," she said. "I won't let it happen here, not tonight." A few people in the audience clapped again, louder this time. The host looked uncertain, torn between moving to commercial or letting the moment breathe. Bill tried to interject, but Jasmine raised her hand slightly, not to silence, but to reclaim. "Bill, you've had your turn," she said gently. "Now it's mine." He froze, lips parting but no sound coming out. And then Jasmine continued, no longer speaking just to Bill, but to everyone watching. "Fairness isn't just about laws or policies," she said. "It's about respect. It's about listening, even when the truth makes us uncomfortable." The studio was utterly still. The audience, the crew, even Bill, all of them seemed frozen in that moment, caught between discomfort and awe. Then, as if on cue, the applause started. Slow at first, one person, then another, until it grew into a full wave of sound that filled the studio. The camera zoomed in on Jasmine's face. Calm, confident, unbothered. Bill tried to laugh it off, muttering something about strong opinions. But everyone watching knew this wasn't just another talk show argument. This was a turning point. Because what Jasmine Crockett did that night wasn't just defend her right to speak. She demonstrated grace under fire, truth under pressure, calm in the face of condescension. And when the show cut to commercial, Bill leaned back, adjusting his tie, while Jasmine sat perfectly still, head high, hands folded, the clear winner of a battle she never wanted, but refused to lose. That clip would later flood social media. Millions of views, endless reactions, countless people saying the same thing. That's how you handle disrespect, with dignity, not noise. That night, Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence a man who wouldn't listen. She reminded the world that truth doesn't need permission to be heard. After that moment, everything changed. The air inside the studio was electric. The audience, the crew, even the bright overhead lights seemed to pause, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Jasmine Crockett had just done something few ever dared. She had confronted Bill O'Reilly on his own show, in his own arena, and not only stood her ground, she turned the tables. But what happened next would show the world why millions would later call it one of the most powerful moments in live television. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't roll her eyes or mock or attack. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression calm, confident, and unshaken. When she spoke, her tone was soft, but every word carried the weight of conviction. She looked directly into the camera and said, "When people in power interrupt voices that challenge them, it's not debate, it's fear. And fear always hides behind noise." The room went silent. The live audience froze, absorbing every syllable. Even the clicking of the studio camera slowed, as if the operators were too caught up to move. Viewers watching from home later said they could feel it, that strange shift in energy when someone who's been talked over finally takes control. It wasn't anger. It wasn't ego. It was truth, spoken with precision and courage. Bill O'Reilly blinked, leaning back slightly in his chair. For years, he had dominated live interviews, quick to interrupt, fast with comebacks, always steering the conversation where he wanted it to go. But not this time. He forced a half smile, trying to laugh it off. "Let's stay on topic," he muttered, voice just a little less steady than before. But everyone in that room, and millions watching from their living rooms, knew exactly what had happened. The topic had already changed. It was no longer about politics or party lines or debate tactics. It had become something much bigger, a lesson in respect, in restraint, and in what real power looks like. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't take a victory lap. She simply continued speaking, her voice like calm water after a storm. "Justice," she said, her eyes never leaving the camera, "isn't loud. It's steady. It doesn't interrupt. It listens, and then it speaks when truth demands it." The line hit like thunder. For a moment, even the stage lights seemed softer, the world outside the studio fading away. It was just Jasmine, the camera, and millions of people finally seeing what grace under pressure looked like. Bill shifted again, clearing his throat, clearly trying to move on. All right, he said, gesturing toward the next question. Let's not get dramatic. But it was too late. The drama had already been written. Not by shouting or spectacle, but by a woman who refused to be silenced. As Jasmine continued her point, breaking down the importance of representation and accountability, something incredible happened. The audience began to nod. Some clapped softly mid-sentence. Even the host, sitting just off camera, seemed caught between admiration and disbelief. When the segment finally cut to commercial, the studio didn't erupt into its usual chatter. Instead, there was a kind of stunned quiet, the quiet that follows a truth too heavy to ignore. And within minutes of the broadcast ending, the internet caught fire. Clips of Jasmine's words flooded social media, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, everywhere. People replayed the exact moment she said, "Fear hides behind noise." Comment sections filled with thousands of reactions. She just schooled him without raising her voice. That's what real professionalism looks like. Power isn't about volume, it's about control. By the next morning, hashtags like Jasmine Crockett and hashtags Fear Behind Noise were trending across platforms. News outlets replayed the segment on loop. Memes, reaction videos, and headlines flooded timelines around the world. One journalist tweeted, "In just 2 minutes, Jasmine Crockett redefined what strength looks like on live television." Meanwhile, Bill O'Reilly remained silent on the incident. No tweets, no statements, nothing. Because how do you respond to being outmatched so effortlessly, so gracefully, and in front of millions? And as for Jasmine, she didn't gloat online, didn't celebrate the moment. When reporters later asked her about it, she simply said, "I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to be heard." That humility only made the world love her more. Because while others saw a debate, Jasmine saw something deeper, a reflection of every person who's ever been talked over, dismissed, or ignored simply for speaking truth. That night, she reminded everyone watching, power isn't who talks the loudest, it's who speaks the truth the clearest. And from that moment forward, the world would never forget the name, Jasmine Crockett. Within hours of the broadcast ending, the world had changed. Clips from the live interview flooded every corner of the internet. On Twitter, hashtags multiplied by the second. By midnight, hashtag Jasmine Crockett vs. O'Reilly was trending worldwide. Millions of people had already replayed the clip, that one unforgettable moment when Jasmine calmly looked across the table, called out Bill O'Reilly for interrupting her, and then delivered her line that would echo through social media for days to come. When people in power interrupt voices that challenge them, it's not debate, it's fear. And fear always hides behind noise. Those 15 seconds became legendary. On YouTube, reaction videos popped up within minutes. Creators analyzing her tone, her composure, and the expression on O'Reilly's face when he realized he'd lost control of his own show. TikTok users posted side-by-side edits, captioned, "This is how you win with words." Memes flooded Instagram. Jasmine's calm expression on one side, O'Reilly's stunned silence on the other, with the caption, "Grace beats aggression." Twitter was a storm of emotion. Comment after comment poured in. She just schooled him without raising her voice. That's how you handle disrespect, with grace and facts. She didn't argue, she educated. Bill tried to talk over her and ended up getting talked about by the entire planet. Even people who usually disagreed with Jasmine politically were suddenly united in their praise. One conservative journalist tweeted, "You don't have to agree with her views to respect what she did. That was composure under fire." Another wrote, "That moment wasn't just about politics, it was about power and how you use it." Within hours, TV networks replayed the segment, calling it the interview that redefined live television. Clips appeared on morning news shows, late-night talk programs, and podcasts across the spectrum. Everyone had an opinion, but most agreed on one thing. Jasmine Crockett had just shown the world that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Meanwhile, Bill O'Reilly's team scrambled for control. They released short statements claiming the clip was being taken out of context. But the internet doesn't forget, and it certainly doesn't forgive. Every meme, every slow-motion replay, every YouTube highlight told the same story. Jasmine Crockett won, without shouting, without anger, with a single raised voice. People admired her not just for what she said, but for how she said it. She didn't match O'Reilly's interruptions with frustration. She matched them with focus. She didn't meet disrespect with defensiveness. She met it with dignity. In a digital world built on outrage, her calm confidence became a beacon. She wasn't just trending, she was teaching. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in confidence, and every young woman watching learned something tonight. Another user wrote, "You can't silence the truth. You can only prove how scared you are of hearing it." That quote alone was retweeted nearly 1 million times in 24 hours. News outlets turned it into headlines. Talk shows quoted it in monologues. Even celebrities joined the conversation. An award-winning actress tweeted, "This is why composure is the strongest weapon." A famous athlete reposted the clip with the caption, "That's how you play under pressure." The internet had chosen its hero. For one night, politics, opinions, and divisions faded. Everyone, from students to lawyers to celebrities, was talking about one thing: the calm power of Jasmine Crockett. And while the buzz kept growing, Jasmine stayed quiet. She didn't tweet a victory message. She didn't do a victory lap on the morning shows. When a journalist asked for her reaction, her team simply said, "She said what needed to be said. The rest speaks for itself." That silence only made her stand taller. Meanwhile, TV analysts dissected every detail: her timing, her tone, the way she paused just enough to make her words sink in. They compared her moment to historic televised confrontations, calling it a turning point for how women handle media aggression. A popular headline read, "She didn't just win the debate, she redefined it." By the end of the week, the clip had crossed 50 million views. Colleges used it in communication classes. Motivational speakers quoted her lines on stage. Even rival hosts quietly admitted that what happened in that studio was something rare, a glimpse of grace meeting arrogance and winning. And somewhere, away from the noise, Jasmine Crockett simply returned to work. No celebration, no self-promotion. Because for her, it wasn't about going viral. It was about something deeper, proving that in a world full of interruptions, truth still finds its voice. Hours had passed, but the tension still hung heavy in the air. The courtroom was silent, too silent. Every eye was fixed on the door where the jury would soon return. For weeks, this case had gripped the nation. The underdogs, factory workers who'd been ignored and exploited, were up against one of the most powerful corporations in the country. And leading their defense was the one woman everyone had underestimated, Jasmine Crockett. Now, after long deliberation, the jury had reached its decision. The door opened. 12 solemn faces stepped in. You could hear nothing but the soft shuffle of their shoes and the faint ticking of the courtroom clock. Jasmine sat still, her hands folded in front of her. Her expression was calm, not out of confidence, but out of faith. She had done everything she could. She had fought for truth with every word, every document, every ounce of strength she had left. Judge Richard Leon entered, his robe flowing behind him, and took his seat. He glanced briefly at Jasmine, then at the jury. The weight of the moment filled the room. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hand. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The audience leaned forward, breaths held. "We, the jury," he began, his voice clear but heavy with emotion, "find in favor of the defense." For a split second, there was silence, complete, stunned silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, and even quiet sobs broke through the air. The workers, those who had spent years being silenced, ignored, and stepped over, stood up and hugged one another. Some cried openly, clutching each other in disbelief. Reporters dashed for the exits, phones and cameras flashing as they raced to break the story first. The sound of shudders, gasps, and applause merged into a single thunderous moment. Judge Leon tapped his gavel, trying to restore order, but even he couldn't hide the small, proud smile tugging at the corner of his lips. When the room finally quieted, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with rare admiration. "This court," he said, looking directly at Jasmine, "commends the defense for its diligence, integrity, and passion. Justice has been served today." The crowd broke into another wave of applause. Jasmine sat there, exhaling slowly, her eyes glistening. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply closed her eyes and let the reality sink in. Against all odds, she had done it. She had stood against a corporate empire, endured endless doubt and scrutiny, and emerged victorious, not just for her clients, but for truth itself. As she gathered her files and rose to leave, the worker surrounded her. "Thank you," one whispered, tears running down his face. "You gave us our voice back," said another. Jasmine smiled warmly, shaking hands, offering quiet words of reassurance. To her, this wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about restoring faith in a system that had failed so many. Outside the courthouse, the world was waiting. Microphones, cameras, reporters, a sea of flashing lights and eager questions. As Jasmine stepped down the courthouse steps, a reporter shouted above the noise, "Miss Crockett, how did you manage to turn this case around?" Jasmine paused. The camera zoomed in, and with her signature calm, she smiled and said, "The truth always finds its way out. You just have to fight hard enough to let it shine." The crowd fell silent for a moment, her words echoing through the courtyard before the cheers began again. That single sentence, simple yet powerful, would soon spread across the nation. Headlines flashed. "Crockett's truth triumphs." The verdict that restored faith in justice. One lawyer's calm courage redefines the courtroom. Clips of her statement flooded social media. Her quote was shared, retweeted, and replayed millions of times. Talk shows analyzed her strategy, news anchors praised her composure, and law students across the country studied her defense as an example of brilliance under pressure. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from the bench itself. As court adjourned, Judge Richard Leon leaned forward, his gaze thoughtful. His closing words would soon become as famous as Jasmine's quote. "In my years on this bench," he said, "rarely have I witnessed such grace, precision, and courage in a courtroom. Miss Crockett's defense will be remembered as one for the history books." The room erupted once more, not just in applause, but in admiration. That day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a case. She won something far greater, the respect of a nation. Her story became more than a legal victory. It became a symbol of what truth can achieve when courage stands beside it. And as the sun set over the courthouse that evening, one thing was certain. The world would remember the day Jasmine Crockett faced power and won with grace.